Today on The Hookup, I'm going to show you how I made this 165-inch projector screen using about 3 gallons of Flex Seal, and why you probably shouldn't do it yourself, at least not the way I did. A little bit of backstory here. Last year I remodeled my patio, and one of the things that I seriously considered was turning that section of my screen and enclosure into a projector screen. In the end, I scrapped the idea because the screen wasn't going to be big enough, and other than the pool, there wouldn't have been a great place to watch it. But having a projector screen on my patio has definitely been in the back of my mind ever since. Fast forward a year and our patio remodel has been awesome, and there's probably not a single thing that I would change. But the shades that I built 4 years ago to protect us from the afternoon sun, they're in the wrong place. So after living with that issue for over a year and procrastinating a new shade project, I was visiting my brother-in-law who builds multi-million-dollar homes, and he showed me a roller screen that had been salvaged from a demolition job that he'd just completed. Originally, these giant screens were designed to be able to enclose a patio space at the touch of a button, but this one had seen better days. The mounting hardware was all rusted out, and the screens had multiple rips and tears that would prevent them from keeping out bugs. But the motors were working, and the screens themselves were bigger than my pergola, so I could trim them down and make one giant screen for the whole pergola instead of multiple small screens like I did before. And if I'm going to have a giant screen, why not make it a projector screen? Related to that, there's a reason that I didn't title this video I made a 165-inch projector screen for $350. Because I started out with a salvaged motor, screen, and roller that probably cost around $4,000 new. But if you want to learn a little bit about projectors, projector screens, and Flex Seal, and see how this projector screen performs, stick around for the rest of the video. This video is sponsored by ZemiSmart's new line of affordable motorized smart window coverings. Whether you prefer the look of cellular shades or roller blinds, ZemiSmart has a window covering for you. The new Amazon customization option allows you to buy custom shades that come ready to install in your exact window size using just a screwdriver. These battery-powered shades will last approximately 600 cycles between charges, and using the Tuya Smart Life app, you can add these things to Google Home, Amazon Echo, or integrate them into your smart home platform of choice. They're also compatible with traditional RF remote controls for maximum convenience. Check out ZemiSmart's window coverings using the links down in the description to support this channel. The original screen was made up of 3 main parts. A giant weatherproof tubular motor made by Simu drives a thick aluminum roller. When I first got the screen, it was 162 inches long, but I trimmed it down to the size of my pergola, which is 144 inches wide and a little over 88 inches tall, which gives me a massive 165-inch diagonal viewing area for a 16:9 screen. One of the key aspects that made this screen enclosure screen work so well as a projector screen is this bottom spreader bar that prevents any wrinkles in the screen, but it's also weighted with around 40 pounds of tungsten to prevent the screen from blowing around in the wind. The weighted bar is the main reason why the motors have to be so huge. And to put it in perspective, the shades that I built 4 years ago are 72 inches square and use a geared stepper motor that provides around 2 Newton meters of torque, compared to the Simu motors in this thing that push out a massive 25 Newton meters. Thankfully, the motors were also operating well under their specs since I ended up adding an additional 30 pounds of Flex Seal onto the screen. So why Flex Seal? Commercials and memes, of course. I had a screen that I wanted to seal up, and if you can make a boat with Flex Seal and a screen door, you can probably make a projector screen. And as I mentioned, the screen already had a lot of damage, and you know what can fix a lot of damage? Flex Seal. I really had no idea how to go about applying the Flex Seal, so I started out with a roller and some thin coats. However, after 2 coats and about a half a gallon of Flex Seal, the screen was barely opaque and none of the holes were filling in. So I decided that on coat number 3, I was going to put it on thick and seal up those holes. And as expected, I used way more Flex Seal. I painted half the screen at a time, and the first coat took about 3/4 of a gallon for half a screen. And there are 2 major problems when painting Flex Seal on a surface like this. First, the screen was hanging vertically, so when you apply the Flex Seal thick enough to cover the holes, it starts to drip down before it can harden enough to stay in place. But you can't lay the screen down flat because of the second problem, and that's every time you brush over the screen, all the Flex Seal goes through the holes and starts dripping down the back. And when you try to spread it out on the back, it just pushes back through to the front. If I'm being honest, about halfway through the first thick coat, I was pretty confident this project wasn't going to work out the way that I planned, but I was already too deep to stop, so I just kept on going. If I had to do it over again, I think I might try to paint from the back first, pushing the Flex Seal through the holes and then smoothing it out on the front, since that seemed to give a little bit better finish with less drips. The second thick coat, which was actually the 4th coat, was more of the same. Lots of Flex Seal and lots of dripping. After I finished, I had spent just a little over 8 hours to apply just under 3 gallons of Flex Seal, which at $95 a gallon meant I was over $300 for this project, if you count all the paintbrushes that, by the way, have to be thrown away between coats because you can't clean Flex Seal off of a paintbrush. Anyways, anxious to see the fruits of my labor, that night we set up an ultra short throw projector and turned on a movie. Honestly, it was terrible, barely watchable. The texture of the drips in the Flex Seal was super visible and distracting, and my friends and I only made it through about 15 minutes of the movie before we called it quits. Discouraged, but not beaten, I convinced myself that the projector that I had actually intended to use, which was a short throw ceiling mounted model from BenQ, would be better since the light would be projected at less of a severe angle, making the texture of the screen less of an issue. Fast forward a week and my new projector was mounted on the wall under my pergola about 9 feet away from the screen, resulting in a massive 165-inch projection. Once again, I turned it on, put on a movie, and I was immediately disappointed by the results. This time the texture wasn't the issue, but the glossy finish of the Flex Seal meant that a large section of the screen had a bright glare on it that moved around based on your seating position. And if you sat in the middle of the couch, the glare was in the exact center of the screen. I was definitely committed to making this thing work no matter what, but at this point I had basically made a screen that was missing the two most important qualities of a projector screen, which are uniformity and anti-reflectivity. Alright, what do you do when something is too glossy or too uneven? You sand it, of course. But can you even sand Flex Seal? There's only one way to find out, so I took the entire screen down, brought it into my garage, and busted out an orbital sander with some pretty aggressive 80 grit sandpaper. There was a good chance that using 80 grit and a power sander was going to immediately destroy the whole project. But in its current state, it was already a total failure, so I figured I'd just give it a shot. Interestingly enough, Flex Seal can be sanded. Not only did it help decrease the texture of the screen, but it also got rid of a lot of the glossy finish. So maybe things were starting to turn around. While I had the screen down, I decided that I wanted to put a dark border on the top and bottom, so I got out my measuring tape and used some dark oil-based paint. Not only was it impossible to get a clean edge because the painter's tape doesn't stick to the Flex Seal, but it turns out that it didn't even matter because paint doesn't stick to Flex Seal either. And even after 24 hours of dry time, I could just peel the paint away with my finger. Thankfully, after some trial and error with different products, I figured out that Plasti-Dip spray paint actually sticks pretty well to the sanded Flex Seal surface. And because it was a spray can, I was able to get the clean borders I was hoping for by just using a straight edge. I painted the spreader bar with the same dark tint of Plasti-Dip and put the screen back up. For a third time now, I fired up a movie, and this time I was pretty sure it was going to look great. But once again, my soul was completely crushed when the glare was almost as bad as it was before. It was completely distracting and still unwatchable. Completely out of ideas, I watched every YouTube video about deglossing surfaces, and I decided that I was going to try a chemical deglosser. Based on YouTube videos and just the chemistry behind it, I was pretty sure that the deglosser wasn't going to work, and it was probably going to ruin and discolor the Flex Seal screen completely. But I was all out of ideas. Then, when I was walking around Home Depot looking for the deglosser, something else caught my eye. Matte Finish Clear Spray Paint. Long story short, 2 cans of this stuff for under $10 saved the entire project. Check out this footage after a single coat on half the screen. Notice the glare on the right side and how it just disappears on the left. It's basically a miracle. 2 cans was enough for 2 light coats over the entire screen, and even though you can scrape away the matte finish with your fingernail, it's not going to flake away on its own and it doesn't discolor the screen, so it's going to be cheap and easy to reapply if I need to. The night after I finished with the matte spray paint, my daughter had some friends over and we hooked up her Nintendo Switch to the projector. 4-player Mario Kart out by the pool was everything that I wanted it to be. In split screen mode, each player has the equivalent of their own 80-inch TV, and the smile on my face was even bigger than the one on my daughter's. Sometimes when the cost of a project starts creeping up, I say things like, I've spent more on dumber things, but I'm not sure that I have in this case. Still, after also watching a movie that night on the new screen, I couldn't have been happier. And if this screen was all I'd ever experienced, I'd be out here on YouTube telling everyone to go make their own Flex Seal screen. But that's not really how I roll. We all know that comparison is the thief of joy, and I was way too happy at this point, so I needed something to compare it to. I picked up a 120-inch motorized screen, like a real one for a home theater. One with ambient light rejecting technology, tension bars, and a proper enclosure. And this one actually comes up from the ground instead of dropping down, which was way cooler than I thought it was going to be. This one happens to be made by Vivid Storm, and it's 120 inches, so not as big as my projector screen, but plenty big to do a comparison. As I mentioned before, my weighted spreader bar does an okay job of keeping wrinkles out of the screen, but it's not a perfect job. And the FlexSeal complicates things even more by making the screen thick and not stretchy. In contrast, the Vivid Storm screen has a super thin material that's spread out not only on the sides by a fishing line type material, but it also has tension bars on the back to make sure it's always completely tight and uniform. During the day, the ambient light rejecting screen makes a huge difference in the contrast of the image, which makes sense. On the FlexSeal screen, things that are supposed to be black just come out the color of the screen, which is white. But on an ambient light rejecting screen, the dark areas are more of a dark gray color, leading to significantly greater contrast. In my opinion, the FlexSeal screen really isn't usable during the day, but the Vivid Storm screen produced an acceptable image even outside in bright daylight. In dim conditions close to sunset, the differences are still visible, but the FlexSeal screen becomes very watchable. And once the sun goes down, both screens are about equal, with the Vivid Storm producing a slightly darker overall image, but one with greater contrast and better black levels. So if I had to do it all over again, would I still use FlexSeal? Probably. We're not talking about a theater room here. We're talking about an outdoor movie screen. And not only does it look pretty great once the sun goes down, but it should be really durable, weather resistant, and easy to clean. As for the Vivid Storm screen, it deserves a proper theater room. And luckily, my wife was so impressed by the outside projector that I got the go-ahead to design and automate a new entertainment center to incorporate the motorized Vivid Storm screen inside. If you're interested in seeing what will hopefully be a highly functional but stealthy automated home theater setup, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that video when it comes out. Thank you so much to my awesome patrons over at Patreon for your continued support of my channel. If you're interested in supporting my channel, please check out the links down in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that thumbs up button and consider subscribing. And as always, thanks for watching The Hookup.